She was barren. This was no ordinary sorrow. In the sea of sand, some stories are buried. They are not written on stone, nor on pages of leather. They live in a woman's breath, in her silence, in her tired eyes, in the steps that walk on someone else's land, but are never her own. Hagar's story is like that. It rose from the dust of Egypt, wandered in the winds of Canaan, and was written on the burning sands of the desert with tears, with blood, and with the cry of a mother that reached the heavens. But this story does not begin where you think it does. It begins with a silence. The silence that echoed every night in Sarai's tent. Sarai was barren. This was no ordinary sorrow. In that time, for a woman, it was the deepest humiliation, the heaviest burden. God had promised Abraham that his descendants would be as countless as the stars, as innumerable as the grains of sand. But Sarai's womb was empty. Years passed. The promise hung in the air, and with every passing year, a new line was drawn on Sarai's face, not of hope, but of shame. At night, she would look at Abraham and think, "Has God forgotten me?" She did not know that this question would soon turn into a decision that would change 3 lives forever. Hagar was Egyptian. How and when she became Sarai's servant is a blurred story. Perhaps with a caravan, perhaps in exchange for a bargain, perhaps lifted from the threshold of an Egyptian palace and thrown into the tents of Canaan. Her name was Hagar, which means stranger, and she remained a stranger. Every morning she rose, washed Sarai's vessels, drew water, spun wool, and in the evening lay down on her mat. Without saying anything to anyone, without anyone asking her anything. Her eyes always remained lowered, as if she had reminded herself that looking toward the sky was not her right. But life had prepared a turn for her she had never imagined. One evening, Sarai called Abraham. Inside the tent, the lamp's flame trembled. There was a quiver in Sarai's voice, the kind that comes when a woman decides to cut out a piece of her heart and give it to someone else. She said, "God has closed my womb. Go to my servant Hagar. Perhaps through her I shall have a child." Abraham said nothing. In his silence there was neither refusal nor agreement, only a weary acceptance born of years of waiting. And that very night, Sarai sent Hagar to Abraham's tent. There was no joy in Hagar's eyes, no excitement, only a deep stillness, the kind found in the eyes of those whose opinion is never asked. Weeks passed. And then what Sarai desired and feared most happened. Life stirred in Hagar's womb. At first, she did not believe it. The morning sickness, the changes in her body. And then one day she felt it. Someone within her. For the first time in her life, Hagar felt something changing inside her. Not only physically, but something deeper. She was a servant. Yet now she carried the child of the man chosen by God. That feeling stirred something in her. Perhaps pride, perhaps strength, perhaps the identity she had never been granted. And unknowingly, her behavior began to change. Her eyes no longer stayed on the ground. She looked directly at Sarai, without lowering her gaze. And in that look was something Sarai could not bear. Sarai recognized that look, the look that says without words, "I can do what you cannot." That look awakened years of buried pain, humiliation, and anger inside Sarai all at once. The woman who herself had created this arrangement was now becoming its greatest victim. She said to Abraham, "This is injustice to me. I gave you my servant, and now she despises me. May God judge between you and me." Again, Abraham chose silence. He said, "She is your servant. Do to her as you please." These were the words of a man standing between the pain of two women, unable to gather the courage to fully stand with either. And those words wrote the next chapter of Hagar's fate, a chapter that would be written in sand and tears. Sarai's anger did not fade slowly. It grew like fire spreading through the desert, quiet but merciless. She did to Hagar what a powerful woman can do to one who is powerless. She began to break her. The work doubled. From morning till night, fetch water, grind flour, tend the animals. And then the coldness in Sarai's gaze, a coldness more painful than a slap. Sarai spoke little, but every silence was a verdict, a reminder to Hagar of who she was, where she had come from, and what her place was. At first, Hagar thought perhaps it would pass. But each day the stone grew heavier, and that stone lay upon her chest. One morning, before the first light touched the earth, Hagar looked out of the tent. The desert stretched endlessly, silent and empty. She placed her hand on her belly. The child moved. And in that moment, she decided. She did not know where she was going. She did not know how. She only knew that staying one more day would kill her soul. She took nothing. No food, no water, no belongings. Only her feet and the life growing inside her. And she walked south, toward Egypt. The land that had once been hers, though perhaps it would no longer recognize her. She did not know that the path she had chosen would lead her to a different destination altogether. Alone in the desert, a pregnant woman. This scene was no less than a nightmare. As the day rose, the sun burned her back. Her lips dried. Salt gathered on her tongue. Blisters formed on her feet. She kept walking, stopping, panting, then walking again. Many times she felt the ground sway. Perhaps exhaustion, perhaps thirst, perhaps the fear consuming her from within. But to stop meant death, and to return meant going back to a life worse than death. By evening, she reached a spring on the way to shore, Bir Lahai Roy. At the sight of water, she fell. On her knees, she drank in long, deep gulps, as if pulling life back into herself. Then she sat, exhausted, broken, alone. The child stirred again, as if saying, "I am here." But instead of comfort, she felt deeper fear, because now she had to think about how to save this child when she could see no way to save herself. And then, in that stillness, something happened. A voice came. There was no human there, no caravan, no traveler. Yet the voice came, and it called her by name. Hagar, servant of Sarai. She trembled. A wave ran through her whole body. She looked around. No one. But the voice was so clear, so near, as if someone stood before her. The voice asked, "Where have you come from, and where are you going?" Hagar answered honestly, without wrapping it in excuses. "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." There was no complaint in her voice, no anger, only a weary truth. A woman so broken she no longer had the strength even to lie. The voice said, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." This was not the answer Hagar wanted. It was not a promise of freedom, not a declaration of justice. It was the same chain, but placed by another. And yet there was something in that voice that stopped her, for it continued. "I will multiply your descendants so greatly that they cannot be counted. You are with child, and you will bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for God has heard your misery." God has heard your misery. Hagar repeated those words many times, slowly, as if applying balm to a wound again and again, until the pain lessened. A servant, a fugitive, a lone woman. And God had spoken her name. The owner of the stars had heard her cry. Hagar did something no one had done before. She gave God a name. She said, "You are El Roy, the God who sees." These words did not come from a prophet's mouth. No priest spoke them. No king chose them. An Egyptian servant, sitting in desert dust, uttered that name with her dry lips. And that name lived on, through centuries, through generations, on the lips of every person who has ever felt in darkness that someone was watching. Hagar rose. She drank a water, placed her hand on her belly, and returned. The same path, the same tent, the same life. But she was no longer the same. Nothing broken had been mended. But she now had the strength to carry the broken pieces. She returned. Ishmael was born. Abraham held him in his arms, and for some years life breathed gently, calmly, like silence after a storm. But this silence too was deception. The real storm was still far away, but it was coming. And this time, it would take everything. 13 years passed. Ishmael grew, lean, swift, raised in desert winds. He shot arrows, tended sheep, and in the evenings sat beside Abraham, listening to old stories. From a distance, Hagar watched, and on her face bloomed a smile grown after years of suffering, slow and delicate, like a flower rising from sand. For Abraham, Ishmael was not just a son. He was proof of God's promise. He embraced him, taught him, considered him his heir. And for the first time, Hagar felt that perhaps she had found her place in this family, on this land, in this story. But life had to shatter that illusion. Sarai, now called Sarah, experienced what no one thought possible. At 90 years old, life stirred in her womb. It was a miracle, and miracles always carry another face, one that smiles less and judges more. Isaac was born. Sarah laughed and said, "God has given me laughter." And indeed, the whole household was immersed in joy. There was a feast, celebration. Guests came with congratulations, and on Abraham's face was that glow that comes to a father seeing his heir. But within the noise of celebration, there was a silence. Hagar's silence. She stood in a corner of the tent, watching, and felt something breaking inside her. Ishmael was 14. He was growing, understanding. At that age, when a boy learns honor and recognizes humiliation, he saw that after Isaac's arrival, everything had changed. Abraham's attention increased toward Isaac. Guests looked first at Isaac, and in Sarah's eyes, whenever they turned toward Ishmael, there was bitterness, as if an old wound reopened each time. On the day of the feast, something happened. Perhaps Ishmael said something while playing with Isaac. Perhaps he laughed. Perhaps it was an ordinary childish thing that adults misunderstood. But Sarah saw, and the fire that had smoldered for 13 years beneath the ashes burst into flame. She said to Abraham, "Cast out this servant and her son. The son of this servant shall not share the inheritance with my son Isaac." The words were like a knife, clear, sharp, merciless. Abraham's heart broke. Ishmael was his son, his firstborn, his flesh and bone. He had raised him 13 years, named him, prayed for him. He was deeply distressed. All night he sat outside the tent beneath the stars, the same stars he had been promised would number his descendants. And God said to him, "Do not be distressed. Do what Sarah says."